Have you ever watched someone dismantle themselves with their own words? Vanessa thought deleting a few messages would erase the evidence. She forgot that phones remember everything, and auditors never stop looking for patterns. When she stood in front of 30 relatives demanding I fund her European getaway, she had no idea I'd spent 3 weeks building a digital paper trail that would unravel her entire scheme. My name is Emma Collins, and last Thanksgiving, I served my stepmother the truth as the main course. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My mother died 3 years ago after a brutal fight with cancer. Watching her fade over 18 months changed something fundamental in our family. Dad became a shell of himself, wandering through the house they'd built together like a ghost haunting his own life. The construction business he'd spent 30 years building started to slip. His partner, David Chen, called me regularly with concerns about missed meetings and unopened mail. Mom had been his anchor, and without her, Dad was drifting. Then Vanessa appeared. They met at a grief counseling group, which should have been my first clue. Vanessa claimed to be mourning her late husband, a story complete with tears and carefully timed emotional breaks. She was 42, polished in that way that comes from expensive salons and personal trainers. Her clothes always looked freshly pressed, her nails perpetually manicured, her smile calculated to appear warm while her eyes assessed what you were worth. Dad fell hard and fast. 6 months after meeting her, he proposed. I voiced concerns, gentle at first, then increasingly direct. But grief makes people vulnerable to anyone offering comfort, and Vanessa was exceptional at playing the role of savior. She organized his pills, sorted his mail, accompanied him to business dinners. She made herself indispensable while I was living 2 hours away in Portland, buried in my career as a financial auditor for Hartman & Associates. The wedding was small, rushed, and felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate at the time. Vanessa wore white, which seemed inappropriate for a second marriage at her age, but Dad was so happy I swallowed my objections. She'd asked me to be her maid of honor, a gesture I now recognize as strategic. Keep your enemies close, especially when they might notice your schemes. The first 18 months of their marriage seemed fine on the surface. Vanessa redecorated the house, erasing Mom's touches with neutral grays and modern furniture that had no soul. She joined the Riverside Country Club and started hosting dinner parties for Dad's business associates. She quit her job as a real estate agent, claiming Dad needed her full attention. He seemed content, which was all I wanted for him, even as something in my gut kept whispering warnings I tried to ignore. Then came the credit card statement. I was visiting for Dad's 56th birthday in early November when I saw it lying on the kitchen counter. Dad was outside grilling, and Vanessa was supposedly getting wine from the cellar. The statement was open, and my auditor's eyes automatically scanned the figures. $47,000 in charges over a single month. Luxury retailers, spa services, jewelry stores, cash advances. The balance was almost maxed out. My hands went cold. This was one of Dad's business cards, linked to the construction company's operating account. I heard Vanessa's heels clicking up the basement stairs and quickly photographed the statement with my phone, hands shaking slightly as I captured every page. Training kicked in. Document first, analyze later, confront only when you have irrefutable proof. Vanessa swept into the kitchen carrying a bottle that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She saw me near the counter and her expression flickered, just for a microsecond, before the warm smile returned. Emma, darling, could you help me open this? The cork is being stubborn. I took the bottle, noting how her eyes darted to the statement I'd carefully replaced exactly as I'd found it. She was checking whether I'd seen it. Which meant she knew it was damning. That night in my old bedroom, I logged into my forensic accounting software and started digging. Dad had made me an authorized user on his business accounts years ago, back when I helped him transition to digital bookkeeping after Mom got sick. He'd never revoked that access, probably forgot about it entirely. Vanessa certainly didn't know. What I found made my stomach turn. The spending had started small 6 months after the wedding. A few thousand here and there, easy to miss in a business doing steady 6-figure projects. But over the past year, it had accelerated dramatically. Vanessa had obtained additional credit cards in Dad's name, opened new lines of credit using the house as collateral, and systematically drained accounts my father had spent decades building. Total damage so far, approximately $230,000. I sat in the darkness of my childhood bedroom, surrounded by boxes of Mom's things Dad couldn't bear to sort through, and felt rage crystallize into focus. This woman had identified a grieving widower with assets and methodically positioned herself to strip everything Mom and Dad had built together. She'd played the role of loving wife while systematically committing financial fraud. But I'm an auditor. Patterns are my specialty. And Vanessa had just made a very expensive mistake. The next morning at breakfast, Vanessa announced her plans. "Robert, darling, I've been thinking." She placed her hand over Dad's, her engagement ring catching the light. That ring had cost $18,000 according to the credit card statement. "We should take a European vacation for the holidays. You work so hard, and you deserve a proper break." I was thinking Paris, then the Italian coast, maybe a week in the Swiss Alps. Dad looked uncomfortable. "Honey, December is actually really busy for us. We've got 3 projects wrapping up before winter weather hits, and I need to be on site." "That's exactly why you need this trip." Her voice took on a slight edge. "You're always putting the business first. What about us? What about our marriage?" I watched this manipulation unfold over my coffee, saying nothing yet. "How much are we talking about?" Dad asked carefully. "Oh, I haven't gotten exact quotes yet, but probably around $30,000 for both of us. Maybe 40 if we do it properly." She said it casually, as if discussing groceries. Dad's face went pale. "Vanessa, that's a lot of money for a vacation. Which you can easily afford." Her tone shifted, sharpening. "Unless you're saying I'm not worth it?" This was emotional manipulation textbook material, and I'd seen enough. "Actually, Vanessa, I'm curious about something." I kept my voice light, conversational. "What happened to your real estate income? You mentioned you had several big commissions coming through before you quit." Her eyes locked onto mine, and for just a moment, I saw calculation behind the facade. "The market shifted, Emma. Sometimes these things don't work out." She turned back to Dad. "Which is why this trip is so important. I've been sacrificing my career to support yours." Dad looked genuinely distressed now, torn between guilt and financial reality. That's when Vanessa made her fatal error. "Actually, Emma, since you're doing so well in Portland with that fancy auditing job, maybe you could contribute to the vacation fund. Think of it as a wedding gift. You never really gave us one." The audacity took my breath away. She was actually trying to manipulate me into funding her fraud. I smiled, the same professional smile I use when I've found discrepancies in corporate accounts and am about to ask very uncomfortable questions. "That's an interesting suggestion, Vanessa. Let me think about it." But I wasn't thinking about funding anything. I was thinking about the forensic analysis waiting on my laptop upstairs. About the deleted text messages that could be recovered. About my Aunt Grace, Mom's sister-in-law, who'd been a family law attorney for 30 years and had never liked Vanessa from the start. I excused myself from breakfast and made a phone call that would change everything. "Aunt Grace? I need your help. And I think you're going to want to hear this." Grace Morgan lived in a Victorian house on Maple Ridge, the kind of place that intimidated people before they even knocked on the door. She'd bought it with her first major settlement 30 years ago and filled it with the spoils of a successful legal career. When I arrived that afternoon with my laptop and 3 years of pent-up suspicion, she was waiting on the porch with coffee already brewing. She was 61, silver-haired, and had the kind of sharp eyes that made witnesses reconsider lying on the stand. Mom used to joke that Grace could spot a fraud from 3 counties away. Dad's older sister had never married, dedicated her life to law, and retired 5 years ago with a reputation that still made local attorneys nervous. "You sounded rattled on the phone," Grace said, ushering me into her study. "That's not like you, Emma. You're usually the calm one." I opened my laptop and showed her everything. The credit card statements, the new accounts opened without Dad's knowledge, the cash advances that went straight into an account under Vanessa's maiden name, the systematic draining of business funds that would eventually cripple Collins and Chen Construction. Grace's expression hardened with each screen. When I finished, she sat back in her leather chair and steepled her fingers. Your father has no idea? He knows money is tight. He mentioned it last month, said business expenses were higher than expected. But Vanessa handles all the household finances now. She convinced him it was too stressful for him after Mom died. Classic financial abuse pattern. Grace pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. Isolate the victim from their own assets, create dependency, maintain control through manufactured crises. How long has this been going on? The spending ramped up significantly about 8 months ago. Small charges before that, probably testing what she could get away with. But recently it's accelerated. And now she wants Dad to drop $40,000 on a European vacation while his business is hemorrhaging cash. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Grace tapped her pen against the pad. And she tried to get you to pay for it? At breakfast this morning. Suggested I contribute as a belated wedding gift. A thin smile crossed Grace's face. Overconfident. That's good. Means she's getting sloppy. She leaned forward. Emma, what do you want here? Because we have several options, and they range from family intervention to criminal prosecution. I thought about Dad's face at breakfast, the confusion and guilt Vanessa had weaponized against him. About Mom's life insurance money that was supposed to secure his retirement. About the business he'd built from nothing, now being cannibalized by someone who'd inserted herself into his life when he was too broken to see clearly. I want her exposed. Completely. In a way she can't talk her way out of or turn around on Dad. I want him to see exactly who he married. Thanksgiving is in 3 weeks, Grace observed. Your father always hosts. He does. Vanessa's been planning this elaborate dinner for weeks. Wants to impress all the relatives, show off her homemaking skills. I saw where Grace was going. You think we should do it then? I think Vanessa has built herself a stage. Seems a shame to waste it. Grace pulled out her phone. I'm calling Thomas Bradley. He handled my last 3 fraud cases before I retired. If we're doing this, we need everything documented properly. And Emma, if we're going nuclear at Thanksgiving dinner, we need to be absolutely certain of every fact. Thomas Bradley arrived within an hour. He was 53, methodical, and had a reputation for building cases that were impossible to wiggle out of. He listened to everything, reviewed my findings, and asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you have access to her phone? No. She's surgically attached to it. Then we need it. Because the spending alone is damning, but if we can prove intent, show she was planning this from the beginning, that turns this from a messy divorce into criminal fraud. Thomas pulled up something on his tablet. She's texting someone. Probably a confidant. Maybe even a partner. Nobody runs a scheme this systematic without talking about it. Grace stood and paced to her window overlooking the garden. Emma, you said Vanessa goes to the country club 3 times a week for tennis and spa appointments? Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoon. She's gone for hours. And she leaves her phone at home? Never. But Dad mentioned she keeps an old phone in her nightstand. Said something about it being her backup in case her main phone dies. Thomas and Grace exchanged looks. That's the burner, Thomas said quietly. That's where the real conversations are. My heart rate kicked up. You want me to get into their house and access that phone? I want you to have coffee with your father tomorrow, Grace corrected. At his house. While Vanessa is at the club. And if you happen to need to use the restroom upstairs, and if that phone happens to be unlocked, well, phones have this unfortunate tendency to automatically back up to cloud services. That's legally gray, I said. It's your father's house, Thomas replied. You have standing to be there. And anything you observe in plain sight while legitimately present is admissible. We just need photos of those text conversations. The phone company records can corroborate everything later once we subpoena them. I spent that night unable to sleep, staring at my ceiling and thinking about crossing lines I'd never crossed before. But then I remembered Vanessa's hand on Dad's at breakfast, the manufactured affection masking systematic theft. I remembered Mom's voice in her last weeks, making me promise to look after Dad, to keep him safe. This was keeping him safe. Wednesday afternoon I texted Dad suggesting coffee at his place. He agreed immediately, mentioning Vanessa would be at her tennis league but he'd love the company. I arrived at 2, and we sat in the kitchen I'd grown up in, now unrecognizable with Vanessa's modern renovations. You seem tired, Dad. He rubbed his face. Business is stressful right now. We're doing well with contracts, but cash flow is tight. I don't understand it. The numbers should be better. Have you looked at the accounts recently? Vanessa handles most of that now. Says I should focus on the construction side, let her manage the administrative details. He smiled weakly. She's been so supportive, Em. I know you two got off to a rocky start, but she really stepped up when I was falling apart. Guilt flickered through me, but I pushed it aside. Dad, I need to use the bathroom. The downstairs one's still broken? Yeah, the tile guy is coming next week. Use the upstairs one. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, every step feeling surreal. My parents' bedroom was at the end of the hall. Vanessa had redecorated here too, replacing Mom's warm quilts and family photos with cold minimalist design. The nightstand on what used to be Mom's side held Vanessa's jewelry box and a charging cable. I pulled open the drawer. The phone was there, an older model iPhone with a cracked screen protector. My hands shook as I picked it up and pressed the power button. It lit up immediately, no passcode required. Vanessa had been so confident in her security through obscurity that she hadn't bothered locking her burner phone. The Messages app showed recent conversations. I started photographing everything, my auditors training taking over. Screenshots of entire conversation threads, dates visible, contact names clear. My phone's camera clicked softly as I captured evidence. The first thread was with someone named Marina. The messages made my blood run cold. He suspects nothing. The European trip will drain another 40 grand and I'm timing it perfectly. His daughter is the only risk but she's too busy in Portland to pay attention. Marina's response, what about the business partner? David Chen? He's raising questions about the accounts but Robert trusts me completely. I've convinced him the business is just going through a rough patch. Another 6 months and I'll have everything transferred to the offshore accounts. Another thread, this one with someone called James. The prenup was a problem but I'm working around it. Robert put the house in both our names 6 months ago because I convinced him it was romantic. That's $800,000 in equity I can claim in the divorce. When are you pulling the trigger? James asked. After the holidays. I want one more big Christmas, then I'll file in January. Claim emotional abuse, make him the villain. My lawyer says I can get at least half of everything plus spousal support. I photographed every message, my hands steadier now as rage replaced nervousness. There were dozens of conversations spanning back to before the wedding. Vanessa discussing her strategy with Marina, coordinating financial moves with James who appeared to be some kind of advisor, even joking about Dad's grief making him an easy target. One message stopped me cold. The dead wife made this so easy. He was desperate for anyone to fill that void. I just had to play the part long enough to get legal access to everything. I heard Dad's voice from downstairs. Emma? You okay up there? Fine. Just a minute. I photographed the last few screens, then carefully replaced the phone exactly as I'd found it, making sure the charging cable orientation matched my memory. I flushed the toilet, ran the water, and composed myself before heading back downstairs. Dad was refilling coffee cups. Everything all right? You look pale. Just a headache, I lied. But Dad, I've been thinking about what you said. About cash flow being tight. Would you let me look at the books? I work with corporate finances every day. Maybe I can spot something you're missing. He looked relieved. Would you? Vanessa keeps saying everything's fine, but the numbers David shows me don't match what she's telling me. I'll come by this weekend. We can go through everything together. I left an hour later with a hug that felt like goodbye to his innocence. Once in my car, I forwarded all the photos to Grace and Thomas, then called them on speaker as I drove. We have everything, I said, my voice shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She's been planning this from before the wedding. There's another man, possibly more than one. She's moving money to offshore accounts. She's planning to file for divorce in January and take Dad for everything. Grace's voice was steel. Send me every screenshot. Thomas and I will start building the case. We have 2.5 weeks until Thanksgiving. Is that enough time? For what we're planning? Thomas said. It's perfect. We're going to need a few things from you, Emma. Can you get us David Chen's contact information? We need to know exactly how much has been taken from the business accounts. I can do that. And one more thing, Grace added. Can you act normal around Vanessa for 3 more weeks? No hints that we know anything? I thought about those messages, about Vanessa joking with her friends about manipulating my grieving father. About her calling my mother, the dead wife, as if she were an inconvenient plot point rather than the woman who'd loved Dad for 30 years. I can do that, I said. I can do whatever it takes. Because in 3 weeks, at Thanksgiving dinner, surrounded by family who'd known and loved my mother, Vanessa was going to discover that some people don't just get mad. They get methodical. And I'd spent my entire career being very, very methodical. David Chen met me at River Bend Cafe the next morning, sliding into the booth with the weariness of someone carrying a secret burden. He'd been Dad's business partner for 22 years, there for every major decision, every celebration, every crisis. Mom's funeral had left him crying as hard as any family member. You sounded urgent on the phone, he said, ordering black coffee from the server. Is Robert okay? I pulled out my tablet, angling it so only he could see the screen. David, I need you to be honest with me. How bad is the financial situation at the company? His shoulders sagged. Bad enough that I've been losing sleep. We've got contracts worth $800,000 coming in over the next quarter, but somehow we're barely making payroll. Robert keeps telling me everything's fine, that Vanessa's managing things, but Emma, the numbers don't lie. Show me. He pulled out his own laptop, bringing up spreadsheets that tracked company finances. As he walked me through the past 18 months, a clear picture emerged. Revenue was actually up 12%. Their crew was solid, projects finishing on time and under budget. By every operational metric, Collins and Chen construction should be thriving. But expenses had mysteriously ballooned. Supply costs that didn't match actual purchases. Consultant fees for services never rendered. Equipment rentals from companies that existed only on paper. Administrative costs that had tripled without any expansion of administrative staff. I confronted Robert about it last month, David said quietly. He got defensive, said Vanessa assured him everything was legitimate. That she was handling vendor relationships and I should focus on project management. It's the first time in 2 decades he's shut me down like that. I showed him my phone, pulling up the screenshots of Vanessa's bank transfers. This is where the money is going. She's created shell companies, fake vendors, phantom expenses. Every dollar that goes to these entities ends up in accounts she controls. David's face went from confusion to rage to devastation in seconds. That's over $200,000. $234,000, based on what I've traced so far. And she's accelerating. At the current rate, the company will be insolvent within 8 months. Robert trusted her completely. We all did. His hands clenched around his coffee cup. What can we do? We're building a case. My Aunt Grace is coordinating everything. But I need documentation from you. Every questionable expense, every vendor that doesn't check out, every financial anomaly over the past 18 months. Can you put that together without Vanessa knowing? She doesn't have access to the company's operational files, only the accounts Robert gave her access to for paying bills. I can pull everything from our secure server. He looked at me with something like hope. When is this happening? Thanksgiving dinner. Grace thinks public exposure is the only way to break through whatever hold Vanessa has on Dad. If we go to him privately, she'll spin it as jealousy or family drama. But if we present everything in front of witnesses, with undeniable documentation, she can't manipulate her way out. David nodded slowly. Your mother would be proud of you. She always said you had her head for numbers and your father's stubbornness. The mention of Mom made my throat tight. She made me promise to look after him. You're keeping that promise. Over the next 2 weeks, our team assembled evidence with surgical precision. David provided complete financial records showing every fraudulent transaction. Thomas subpoenaed phone records from the carriers, revealing that Vanessa's burner phone had been active since a month before she even met Dad, suggesting premeditation from the very beginning. Grace contacted Marina, the friend from Vanessa's text messages, and discovered she'd been involved in 2 previous similar schemes in other states. Nina Patel, my colleague from Hartman and Associates, volunteered her time to create forensic analysis charts. She traced every dollar from the business accounts through the maze of shell companies and offshore transfers, building a visual representation so clear that even someone with no financial background could follow the theft. Chris Hayes, a friend from college who now worked in IT security, recovered deleted messages from cloud backups. Vanessa had been careless with her digital footprint, believing that deleting texts from her phone erased them from existence. But servers remember everything, and Chris knew how to ask them the right questions. What emerged was a portrait of calculated predation. Vanessa had specifically targeted grief counseling groups in wealthy areas, looking for recent widowers with assets and emotional vulnerability. Dad was her 3rd victim. The first 2 had settled quietly, too embarrassed to press charges. Grace had tracked them down, and both men agreed to provide statements about Vanessa's identical pattern of behavior. Meanwhile, I had to maintain normalcy at home. I visited for Sunday dinner, complimented Vanessa's cooking, listened to her elaborate Thanksgiving plans. She wanted to invite 30 people, including Dad's business associates, his entire construction crew, and several families from the country club. She'd hired caterers, ordered custom floral arrangements, and bought a dress that cost $2,000 specifically for the occasion. It's important that we present the right image, she told me while showing off her seating chart. Your father's business depends on reputation, and people need to see us as a power couple in this community. I smiled and nodded, watching her plan the stage for her own exposure. Grace held strategy sessions at her house every few days. Thomas wanted to coordinate with local law enforcement, but Grace disagreed. The moment we involve police before Thanksgiving, word gets out. Vanessa has friends at the country club married to city officials. She'll hear about it and run. Grace tapped the legal pad where she'd outlined our approach. We need her confident and present. The civil case we can file immediately. The criminal charges can come after, once she can't flee. What about Dad? I asked the question that had been haunting me. This is going to destroy him. Again. Grace's expression softened. Your father is stronger than you think. Yes, this will hurt. But staying in this marriage will destroy him financially and emotionally. Better a sharp pain now than a slow death over years. The weekend before Thanksgiving, Vanessa made her next move. She cornered me in the kitchen while Dad was taking a business call in his study. Emma, I wanted to talk to you about something. Her voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. Your father mentioned you offered to look at the business finances. I think that's unnecessary and frankly inappropriate. I'm just trying to help. By implying I'm not handling things properly? She stepped closer, and I saw the calculation in her eyes. I know you've never liked me. You've made that clear since the beginning. But Robert and I are building a life together, and I won't have you undermining that with your suspicions. I don't know what you mean. Don't play innocent. I see how you look at me, how you question everything I do. You need to accept that your father has moved on from your mother and stop trying to sabotage his happiness. It took everything in me not to throw the evidence in her face right then. Instead, I channeled every frustrating audit meeting I'd ever sat through, maintaining professional neutrality. Vanessa, I want Dad to be happy. That's all I've ever wanted. She studied me for a long moment, trying to detect deception. Finally, she stepped back. Good. Then you'll understand why I need you to stop asking questions about money. It's stressful for Robert, and stress isn't good for his heart. The doctor said so. That was new. What doctor? Dad's heart is fine. He had some tests done last month. Didn't he tell you? Her smile was sympathetic, but her eyes were cold. Nothing serious, but he needs to avoid stress. Which is why this European vacation is so important, and why your financial review would be counterproductive. She was lying. I'd talked to Dad 2 days ago and he'd mentioned nothing about heart problems. This was another layer of manipulation, creating a medical crisis to justify her spending and discourage scrutiny. I understand, I said, mentally adding this conversation to the list of evidence. After she left, I texted Grace. She's getting suspicious. Tried to shut down any financial review. Also claimed Dad has heart problems he never mentioned. Grace's response came immediately. Classic isolation tactic. 5 more days. Can you hold? I could hold. I'd spent 3 years watching my mother fight a disease that was slowly killing her, staying strong so she wouldn't see me fall apart. 5 days of acting normal around the woman stealing my father's future was nothing compared to that. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, Vanessa made her final mistake. She called me directly, her voice warm and friendly. Emma, sweetie, I wanted to apologize if I came across as harsh the other day. I'm just protective of your father, you know? We're family now, and I want us to have a good relationship. I appreciate that, Vanessa. I was thinking, since you've been so helpful, maybe you could contribute something special to Thanksgiving dinner? Your mother's famous apple pie recipe. Robert mentioned how much he misses it. The manipulation was breathtaking. Asking me to recreate Mom's signature dish, using Dad's grief as leverage, positioning herself as the bridge to happy memories while simultaneously stealing everything those memories were built on. I'd be happy to, I said, my voice steady. Mom would want her recipe to be part of the family tradition. Wonderful. And Emma? I really am glad we're going to be closer. You'll see, once you give me a real chance, that I'm good for your father. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment and let myself feel the full weight of rage I'd been suppressing. Then I called Grace. She wants me to make Mom's apple pie for Thanksgiving. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then you'll make the best apple pie that kitchen has ever seen. And while she's eating it, surrounded by family and friends, we'll serve her something she won't be able to swallow. The evidence packets? Thomas has prepared 30 copies. Every guest gets one. Complete documentation of every fraudulent transaction, every manipulative text message, every lie she's told. We'll distribute them during dessert. That's brutal. That's justice, Grace corrected. Your mother spent 30 years building a life with your father. Vanessa thought she could waltz in and harvest everything in 18 months. She's about to learn that some families fight back. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived with crystalline autumn weather. Dad's house looked beautiful, decorated with fall colors and twinkling lights. Vanessa had outdone herself, creating a scene of domestic perfection. The dining room table stretched to accommodate 30 guests, set with china that had been Mom's, now repurposed for Vanessa's performance. I arrived early with my apple pie, still warm from the oven. Dad hugged me in the kitchen, looking happier than I'd seen him in months. Your Mom's recipe, he said, his eyes getting misty. Thank you, honey. Vanessa swept in, resplendent in her expensive dress, playing the gracious hostess. She air-kissed my cheek. Emma, you look lovely. Could you help me with the place cards? As I arranged names at each seat, I noticed Grace's position directly across from Vanessa. Thomas was seated near the head of the table, within easy reach of Dad. David Chen and his wife were positioned strategically throughout the seating arrangement. Every ally we had was placed for maximum effectiveness. Guests started arriving at 3. Business associates, construction crew members with their families, country club friends Vanessa had cultivated, and relatives who'd known Dad and Mom for decades. 30 people gathering to celebrate gratitude, completely unaware that this Thanksgiving dinner was about to become something none of them would ever forget. Vanessa worked the room like a politician, all charm and warmth, her hand possessively on Dad's arm. She'd orchestrated this moment to showcase her position as the woman who'd saved Robert Collins from his grief, who'd stepped into a dead woman's shoes and made them her own. She had no idea those shoes were about to be filled with evidence she couldn't outrun. Dinner service went flawlessly, exactly as Vanessa had planned. The catered turkey was golden and succulent, the side dishes arranged like something from a magazine spread. She'd even hired servers to manage the meal, freeing her to glide between conversations and accept compliments on her hostessing abilities. Dad beamed with pride, clearly grateful that life had returned to some semblance of normalcy after years of grief and loneliness. I caught Grace's eye across the table. She gave the smallest nod. Everything was ready. Vanessa stood as dessert was being prepared, tapping her wine glass with a fork to get everyone's attention. The conversations died down as 30 faces turned toward her. I just want to say how grateful I am to have all of you here today, she began, her voice perfectly pitched with emotion. 18 months ago, I met a man who'd lost everything that mattered to him. Robert was drowning in grief, and honestly, so was I. We found each other in that darkness and built something beautiful together. Several guests made appreciative sounds. Dad reached for her hand. Being part of this family, this community, has been the greatest gift of my life. Robert's late wife clearly raised an incredible daughter in Emma. She gestured to me with her wine glass. And his business partnership with David has shown me what true loyalty looks like. I'm honored to be building our future together with all of you as witnesses. The irony of that last statement would have been funny if it wasn't so grotesque. So please, raise your glasses. To family, to gratitude, and to the future we're all creating together. Everyone raised their glasses. Dad looked happier than I'd seen him since Mom's diagnosis. My chest tightened with what was about to happen, but I forced myself to remember those text messages. The dead wife made this so easy. As glasses clinked and people took sips, Grace stood smoothly. Vanessa, that was lovely. I'd like to add something, if I may. She didn't wait for permission. Family is indeed about gratitude and building futures together. It's also about truth and protecting the people we love from those who would harm them. The room shifted uncomfortably. Dad's smile faltered. Grace, this isn't the time, Vanessa said, her voice still pleasant but with an undercurrent of warning. Actually, this is exactly the time. Grace pulled out her phone. Because you've made this moment about family and truth, and I think everyone here deserves to hear some truths you've been keeping hidden. Thomas stood as well, moving to stand beside Grace. David Chen rose at his position further down the table. The guests looked confused, sensing something wrong but not yet understanding what. What is this? Vanessa's smile was frozen in place. Robert, your sister is trying to ruin our dinner. Dad looked between Grace and Vanessa, uncertain. Grace, what's going on? Emma, would you please distribute the packets? Grace said calmly. I'd stacked them on the sideboard earlier, 30 manila envelopes, each one stuffed with documentation. I began placing them in front of each guest, my hands steady despite my racing heart. Vanessa's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure. This is absurd. Robert, stop this immediately. But Dad had opened his envelope. His fingers trembled as he pulled out the first page, a summary sheet that Thomas had carefully prepared. It listed every fraudulent account, every shell company, every dollar stolen. The total was printed in large red numbers at the bottom, $234,000. What is this? Dad's voice was barely audible. Around the table, guests were opening their own packets. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room as people began reading. The construction crew members who trusted Dad completely looked stunned. The country club friends Vanessa had cultivated were scanning the pages with growing horror. "Those are fabrications," Vanessa said, her voice rising. "This is a setup. Emma has hated me from the beginning and she's manufactured evidence to destroy our marriage." "Manufactured?" Grace's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Let's talk about what's manufactured, shall we? Starting with your grief support group story. The husband you claim to be mourning? Never existed. We checked death certificates across 3 states. You've never been married before." Vanessa's eyes darted toward the exits, but Thomas had positioned himself near the front door and David blocked the path to the kitchen. "That's not true. You're lying. Page 4 of your packets," Grace directed the guests. "You'll find certified records showing that Vanessa Hartley has used 3 different last names in the past 6 years, each time targeting recent widowers in grief counseling groups." Dad was staring at Vanessa like he'd never seen her before. "Vanessa, tell me this isn't true." "Robert, please, you know me. These people are trying to poison you against me because they can't accept that you've moved on." I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking now but my voice clear. "Dad, I need to read you something." These are text messages from Vanessa's second phone, the one she keeps in her nightstand. Vanessa lunged toward me, but David stepped between us. "Don't," he said quietly. I began reading from the screenshots I'd memorized. November 5th, message to Marina, "He suspects nothing. The European trip will drain another 40 grand and I'm timing it perfectly. His daughter is the only risk but she's too busy in Portland to pay attention." The room had gone completely silent except for my voice. November 12th, message to James, "The prenup was a problem but I'm working around it. Robert put the house in both our names 6 months ago because I convinced him it was romantic. That's $800,000 in equity I can claim in the divorce." Dad had gone gray. One of the construction crew members, a man named Pete who'd worked for Dad for 15 years, stood up. "Jesus Christ, Robert. I'm so sorry." I kept reading, each message more damning than the last. The jokes about Dad's grief making him easy to manipulate. The discussions of offshore accounts where stolen money was being hidden. The timeline for filing divorce in January, time to maximize her financial take while Dad's business was at its weakest. Then I reached the one that had made me physically ill when I first saw it. October 2nd, message to Marina, "The dead wife made this so easy." He was desperate for anyone to fill that void. I just had to play the part long enough to get legal access to everything. Someone gasped. Multiple people were crying. Dad sat frozen, the packet forgotten in his hands. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. "You had no right to go through my phone. That's illegal. This whole thing is illegal." Actually, Thomas spoke for the first time, his lawyer's voice calm and measured. Emma was legitimately present in her father's home. The phone was in plain sight in an unlocked drawer. And given that the phone was being used to coordinate criminal activity against her father, any expectation of privacy is legally moot. Furthermore, Grace added, "We have phone company records confirming every message Emma read. Deleted texts from your primary phone. Cloud backups from the burner. We have 18 months of digital evidence showing systematic financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." Vanessa looked around the room, searching for an ally, anyone who might believe her over the mountain of evidence being presented. But the guests were all reading their packets now, seeing the bank statements, the forged signatures, the trail of money moving from legitimate accounts into shells and then offshore. One of the country club women, someone Vanessa had befriended over tennis, stood abruptly. "I introduced you to the Hendersons for their kitchen renovation. Did you steal from them too? This is insane. You're all insane." Vanessa grabbed her purse from the sideboard. "I don't have to listen to this." "Actually, you do." A new voice came from the doorway. A woman in a blazer with a badge clipped to her belt stepped into the dining room. "Vanessa Hartley, I'm Detective Sarah Martinez with the Riverside Police Department. I need you to stay right where you are. I hadn't known Grace had contacted the police. Looking at my aunt, I saw the slight satisfaction in her expression. She'd wanted Vanessa to incriminate herself in front of witnesses first, to remove any possibility of claiming innocence later. I'm not saying anything without my lawyer, Vanessa said, finally showing some intelligence. That's your right. Detective Martinez pulled out handcuffs. But I'm placing you under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. We'll add additional charges as the investigation continues. As the detective began reading Vanessa her rights, the woman who'd played grieving widow and devoted wife so convincingly transformed into something else entirely. Her face contorted with rage. You stupid man, she spat at Dad. You and your pathetic grief. Your dead wife, your boring business, your provincial little life. I could have drained every penny and been gone before you even noticed if your bitch daughter hadn't interfered. The cruelty in her voice silenced any remaining sympathy in the room. Dad flinched like he'd been physically struck. All of you sitting here so smug, Vanessa continued as Martinez cuffed her wrists. You think you're better than me? I found opportunities and I took them. That's called being smart. That's called being a predator, Grace said coldly. And predators eventually get caught. As Martinez led Vanessa toward the door, she made one last attempt to wound Dad. She's been dead for 3 years, Robert. You really thought someone like me would want you for any reason other than money? You're weak, pathetic, and boring. Just like she was. Chen moved faster than I'd ever seen him move, stepping between Vanessa and Dad. Get her out of here, he told Martinez quietly. The door closed behind them, and the dining room erupted. People were talking over each other, expressing shock and sympathy, some crying, others angry. Dad sat motionless, staring at the papers in front of him like they were written in a language he couldn't comprehend. I moved to his side, kneeling beside his chair. Dad, I'm so sorry. He looked at me with devastated eyes. She said she loved me. I believed her. I know you did. Your mother. His voice broke. She would be so disappointed in me. Grace appeared on his other side, her hand on his shoulder. Linda would be proud you opened your heart again, Robert. And she'd be furious at the woman who exploited that. But disappointed in you? Never. Thomas was already coordinating with the remaining guests, explaining that their testimony might be needed, collecting contact information. The catering staff stood uncertainly in the kitchen doorway, unsure whether to serve dessert or flee. My apple pie sat on the counter, perfect and untouched. Mom's recipe, made with care for a Thanksgiving that had turned into something none of us could have imagined. Pete, the crew member who'd stood up earlier, approached Dad hesitantly. Boss, me and the guys, we had no idea. If there's anything you need, anything at all. We're going to rebuild this, David said firmly. The business, the accounts, everything. She didn't break what we've spent 20 years building. But looking at Dad's face, I knew Vanessa had broken something far more valuable than business accounts. She'd shattered his ability to trust, his willingness to believe in love after loss. She'd weaponized his grief and my mother's memory. And as I watched him struggle to process the betrayal, I felt the full weight of what we'd done tonight. We'd stopped Vanessa, exposed her crimes, protected Dad's assets and future. We'd won. So why did victory feel so much like devastation? The weeks following Thanksgiving felt like living through an earthquake's aftershocks. Dad moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding the bedroom he'd shared with Vanessa, sleeping instead in his study. The country club friends disappeared, embarrassed by their association with the scandal. But the construction crew rallied, showing up at the house with casseroles and offers to help with anything he needed. Vanessa was denied bail after the prosecutor argued she was a flight risk with known offshore accounts. Her attorney tried to claim entrapment and illegal evidence gathering, but Thomas dismantled every argument with the precision of someone who'd spent 30 years in courtrooms. The text messages were admissible. The financial records were legitimate. The testimony from her two previous victims in other states established a pattern of predatory behavior that made any claim of innocent misunderstanding impossible. Grace moved into Dad's guest room for 2 weeks, managing the chaos of police interviews, lawyer meetings, and insurance claims. She coordinated with David to stabilize the business finances, identifying which assets could be recovered and which were lost forever. The offshore accounts were frozen pending criminal proceedings, but recovering that money would take years of legal wrangling. I took family leave from my job in Portland, unable to focus on corporate audits when my own family needed me. Every morning I'd arrive at Dad's house to find him sitting at the kitchen table with cold coffee, staring at nothing. The man who'd built a successful business through hard work and integrity couldn't comprehend how thoroughly he'd been deceived. One evening, 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I found him in the garage going through boxes of Mom's things he'd never been able to sort through. Photos, letters, small mementos of their 30 years together. He held up a picture of their 25th anniversary, both of them laughing at some joke the camera had captured mid-delivery. "I thought I was honoring her memory by moving forward," he said quietly. "Your mother wouldn't want me alone," everyone kept saying. "She'd want you to be happy." So when Vanessa appeared and seemed to understand grief, to offer comfort without judgment, I convinced myself it was fate. That Linda had somehow sent her. I sat beside him on the concrete floor, surrounded by memories. "Mom would want you to be happy, Dad." That part was true. But she would have seen through Vanessa immediately. "Your mother had instincts about people. She always said I was too trusting, that I saw the best in everyone even when I shouldn't." He set the photo down carefully. "I let my loneliness make me stupid. You let your grief make you human. There's a difference." David stopped by most evenings, and slowly I watched their partnership begin restoring Dad's foundation. They'd review construction bids together, discuss crew scheduling, plan the spring projects. The business had survived Vanessa's theft, barely, but it would take time to rebuild the financial cushion she destroyed. The trial was set for March. Thomas prepared me for testimony, walking me through the questions the defense would ask, the ways they'd try to paint me as a jealous daughter manufacturing evidence. But he wasn't worried. They have to overcome the phone records, the financial documentation, the testimony from her previous victims, and her own words on that recording. That's an impossible defense. Christmas came and went quietly. Dad couldn't face a big celebration, so it was just him, me, and Grace around a small tree in the living room. We didn't exchange elaborate gifts. The best present any of us could have asked for was simply getting through the season. In January, I received a letter from Vanessa's attorney. She wanted to negotiate a plea deal and was offering a full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. The prosecutor called it a tactical surrender. "She knows we have her," he explained. "Taking it to trial means a longer sentence and public testimony that will make things even worse. With a plea, she does 15 years instead of 25, and your father doesn't have to testify." Dad chose the plea deal. He didn't want to sit in a courtroom and hear more details about how Vanessa had targeted him, researched him, orchestrated every moment of their relationship. The confession was enough. She admitted to fraud, theft, identity manipulation, and targeting vulnerable individuals for financial exploitation. The sentencing hearing in February was brief. Vanessa appeared in an orange jumpsuit, her designer clothes and careful makeup replaced by prison wear and harsh lighting. She didn't look at Dad or me as the judge outlined her crimes and handed down 15 years in federal prison with mandatory restitution of all stolen funds. As we left the courthouse, Dad stopped on the steps and took his first deep breath in months. "It's really over," he said, not quite a question. "It's really over," Grace confirmed. By spring, life began finding a new rhythm. Dad threw himself into work with renewed energy, taking on challenging projects that required his full attention. David mentioned he seemed more present, more engaged than he'd been even before Vanessa. Sometimes trauma clarifies what matters. I returned to Portland but drove down every other weekend. The house slowly transformed as Dad finally finished packing away Mom's things, not erasing her but finding a way to honor her memory without being frozen by it. He joined a legitimate grief support group, this time vetting it carefully, and started volunteering with a local program that helped widows and widowers navigate financial decisions after loss. One Saturday in April, I found him in the backyard planting Mom's favorite roses, the ones Vanessa had ripped out to make room for her modern landscaping. He worked the soil carefully, his hands remembering the rhythm of gardening beside his wife all those years. "Grace told me something interesting," he said as I knelt to help. "She said your mother made you promise to look after me. That true?" "Mom made me promise a lot of things. I'm sorry you had to keep that promise the way you did." Going through Vanessa's phone, building that case, watching me fall apart on Thanksgiving. That shouldn't have been your burden. I pressed soil around a rosebush, breathing in the earthy smell. Mom taught me that protecting the people you love isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it means making hard choices and living with the consequences. She taught you well. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to be okay, Emma. It's going to take time, but I'm going to be okay." And watching him work in the garden, rebuilding what had been destroyed, I believed him. The financial recovery took 2 years. Most of the offshore money was eventually recovered and returned. The business not only stabilized but grew, with Dad and David expanding into sustainable construction methods that attracted new clients. Dad sold the house, unable to live with Vanessa's renovations haunting every room, and bought a smaller place near the river where he could fish and find peace. Grace went back to full retirement, satisfied that her brother was safe. Thomas added the case to his firm's wall of victories. David and Dad hired an independent accountant to manage company finances, ensuring no one person ever had that kind of access again. And me? I got promoted to senior auditor, my work on uncovering Vanessa's fraud apparently impressive enough to warrant recognition. But more importantly, I learned that sometimes love means being willing to break someone's heart to save their life. That documentation and evidence matter more than emotion. That justice, while not always satisfying in the moment, has a way of restoring balance over time. Vanessa will be eligible for parole in 12 years. Dad will be 68 then, hopefully surrounded by genuine relationships built on truth rather than manipulation. And I'll still be keeping the promise I made to Mom, watching over him, ready to audit anyone who thinks they can exploit kindness for profit. Because some people see vulnerability as opportunity. But some families see it as a call to action. And in the end, the paper trail always tells the truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.